Hi.
Danielle goes first.
It's Danny Fleming.
And Marcus Collins from MA Properties with the Arlington 2020-2021 market review or update, whichever way you want to think of it.
Yep. And we're here. We're going to talk about what's going on in Arlington at the moment with real estate. Oh my goodness.
Quite a
my
market.
Goodness. Yeah, it's been a market. It's one for the record books across the whole of the Boston area. Arlington in particular, Lexington's really popular. Even, you're talking about Acton and Westford. Anyway, we'll get into all of that.
Yep,
I don't
indeed.
need to talk about
No,
that
you
now.
don't.
So why do we do these? Well, it's easy to get information and data today, but it's much harder to make sense of it and use it to your advantage. So part of what we do is we take the time to explain, and that's why we're serious about learning every data point in detail. And we study our local markets obsessively.
As you'll see in a minute.
We have something like 50 odd towns in our data warehouse, and we do Arlington. If you have a request for another town, you're interested in what's going on, just let us know, and we'll do one for that town as well, because we have a lot of towns where we've got the information for, and this is the sort of information that we have. Over to you, Marcus.
Over to me. So the agenda this evening, we're going to talk about the single family home market, and then we're going to take a look at condominiums, and then we will get tell you what's happened in 2021, and we'll do that throughout it, of course. But then we'll get our crystal ball out and talk about what's going to happen through the rest of 21 and perhaps into 2022 as well. So we'll get our kind of prediction section right at the end of it. So first of all, we often get asked this question: so there's lots of information you're going to see. Where do I actually find it? Is it available just in this presentation, or is it in other places? Well, it's available in a lot of different places. First place it's available is in our market review. If you live in the Arlington area or out in town, you will have received this in the mail back in January, mid-January, give or take. Cram-packed full of information about what's happening in the market. So that's on our website. If you want a harder copy, just let us know. We can let you have that. It talks a lot about what happened in 2020, which was clearly an unprecedented year with COVID and kicking in. As well as that, though, and what you'll see more of this evening is really what's going on in the current market and current information. So much of this, in fact, almost all of this is available on our website, maproperties.com/statistics. All this, almost everything you see this evening. The analysis will be missing, but feel free to reach out and ask us, any questions you might have.
We
More
like
than willing
talking
to
about
talk
this
about
stuff.
this. So,
Yeah,
absolutely.
We're very analytical, so we like talking about exactly what's going on in the market because it's not guesswork. We know what's happening because of the data.
So what's happening in the single family home market?
Yeah.
So first thing is we'll talk about inventory. And I want to make a clarification here because I've heard an awful lot of people talk about inventory and then they talk about supply and they use those terms synonymously. And they are totally different, as you'll see in a moment. But supply is the number of homes coming on the market. Demand clearly is the number of homes exiting, the number of homes selling. Inventory is basically what's left over. It's what's left in the warehouse. Stuff gets delivered, stuff gets taken out. What's left in the warehouse? How many homes are there essentially for a buyer to buy, and what the information you see here on the first of the month? So if they were to look on the first of the month, how many homes would they see available for them to buy? The absolute numbers don't really matter. It's the shape of this graph which does, the shape that really matters. So we've gone back all the way to 06. What you can see playing out here...
And he's got a new toy.
I have a new toy, sorry about that.
Yeah.
It's good though, it's a good toy. Trust me, it's a good toy. But I have to look over there because that's the screen I'm actually, we're projecting on here. So what you can see in this 06 through about 2012, that's the downturn. That's the so-called recession. That's it kind of here at the end of the day. That's when the market didn't do well. But look what happened in 2012 and then further into 2013. We saw that the amount of inventory begin to decline. And what's happening here is not that the number of homes coming on the market, the supply declined. What happened is the demand increased.
Yeah.
The first-time home buyers predominantly, with talking about Arlington here this evening, they came back into the market. They were renting. They didn't have anywhere to sell. They came back into the market in 12 and even more so in 2013.
Because they weren't at risk of losing their jobs anymore. I mean, the whole economy. Let's go buy a house.
Right. The economy is what kind of started this whole thing. The fact that they didn't have a home to sell allowed them to come into the market in 2013. If I was to show you the data for example, Winchester or Lexington, you would see that the big reduction in inventory happened in 2013. There wasn't that kind of halfway house.
Yeah.
Because in those more expensive towns, it's predominantly second-time buyers, not first-time buyers who are moving into the town. Not exclusively, of course, but with that higher price point, over $1 million, that was predominantly kind of step-up buyers, if you will. And they didn't have the luxury of doing that in 2013. But as the number of buyers increased in 2013, it allowed them to sell and them to therefore move up in that kind of 2013 and on. If we kind of get much more up to date, 18, 19, specifically the second half of 19, and to some extent in parts of 20. 19 is an interesting year because there was much discussion of a recession in 2019. Seems like a long time ago.
An economic downturn happening in 2020 or 2021. That
will
was
that
what the talk
impact
was.
the housing market?
Yeah.
And that's why you saw more inventory,
Yeah.
sellers coming on the market, buyers being just that little bit reluctant to buy, and therefore, unsurprisingly, inventory levels rose.
And you saw that in fall of 2018 too. I mean, I know
Right.
that we had a few homes on the market in Arlington fall of 2018 and they weren't selling, whereas prior to that we'd had lots and lots and lots of activity. But all of a sudden now the buyers were being a little bit more,
Yeah. Reticent about buying.
Yeah.
Sellers want to sell quickly before the downturn. Buyers think, maybe I'll wait 6-12 months. Perhaps I'll buy the house cheaper than I would have, today.
Yeah.
They were wrong, but that's okay. Hindsight 2020 vision. So
hindsight is a wonderful thing
we'll
to
talk
have,
about that a little bit as
but
we go through
hindsight is already after it's happened. So let's talk about how we can.
So much of the discussion in the early part of 2020 was what was going to be the impact of COVID. Was it going to mean that the buyers disappeared and the sellers maybe disappeared? There really would be very low home sales throughout 2020. As you'll see here, this is the number of home sales. Blue is existing, green is new construction, and then this kind of slither of orange color there, the off-market teardowns. The number of home sales in Arlington in 2020 remained relatively static in comparison to what we've seen historically. So Arlington weathered the storm, if you will, of 2020 very, very well. Didn't see any large increase in home sales, but didn't see any decrease in home sales either. So we weathered it very, very well.
It's a very stable market from
Very
the
much
perspective of supply.
And you'll see that with the sell price to list price ratio.
Yeah.
This is the ratio of the sell price to the list price. If a home comes on the market at 700, sells for 700, then guess what? It's 100% sell price to list price ratio. And once we pulled out of the downturn, as you can see from this data, we jumped quickly to 100, but actually we went beyond that to 102, 103. We were kind of averaging around about 102, 103 throughout 2013 all the way through to, in fact, 2019 and into 2020. Dipped a little, in that kind of 19 time frame, but realistically it went from 104 to 102. In comparison, towns around at the same time, Winchester, Belmont, Lexington, for example, were in the high 90s, 99, maybe dipping into 100. So Arlington was always 3-4 percentage points higher. And this is why we say, and continue to say, that Arlington is a very hot market. Very much supply constrained, I guess, is probably the economic term for it. Not enough supply, as you saw with the home sales. What does this mean now? This is historical. This came out of the market review. This was 2020. What about 2021? So the orange line you can see here is the sell price to list price ratio. I'm going back now to May 2020 all the way through to April 2021. And as you can see, I use my fancy pointer, it was relatively static in that kind of 102, 103 price point. Dipped a little bit in the winter, which is here.
Which is what we should explain the lag, the lag in those months.
All right. So this is we only know the sale price to list price ratio when a property sells. It goes closes. Excuse me. It sells, goes under agreement 6 to 8 weeks prior to this. So this is the sale price list price, a little bit of a lagging indicator of demand essentially, and so that's why you see in this time frame here, in that February time frame, it was somewhat depressed because the homes that sold in February,
or January,
realistically, they went under agreement in November and December. Typically a very, very slow time of the year. Now, look what happens as we go into 2021. In February, yes, okay, it's about 104 where we'd expect it to be, look at that. But as soon as we get into March and April, remember that 2-month time frame goes...
2-month time lag.
You're right, it goes under, sells, closes in March, probably went under agreement in January, closes in April, probably went under agreement in February. So as soon as we got into 2021, January and February, lo and behold, that ratio rose. And the reason that ratio rose was that there is huge buyer demand. The buyers came out. It was actually quite a mild winter. And so that's why the buyers were out earlier. But the reason it's so much higher is that as a home came on, there were many, many buyers competing for that home. They drove the house price higher, the sale price higher, and therefore they drove the ratio higher.
Well, it's also, when you talk about this, we bought a home on the market on Princeton in Kelwin Manor, middle of April. Huge response to the home, had lots of competing offers on the home, and it's indicative of what's going on in this market. Now, at that one, it was priced at 1.4, which is in the upper realms of the pricing in Arlington. Even across all price ranges, there's huge demand. We have another one coming on Princeton in June. So we anticipate that we're going to get a similar response to that, which is it's across all price ranges.
And in fact, if you look outside Arlington is kind of price constrained to some extent by that kind of mid millions, 1.5 million. If you look at towns around Lexington, for example, we're seeing competition at the lower price points, no surprise there, but also at the very high price points, upwards of 2.5, even up to anywhere up to $3 million. We're beginning to see lots and lots of demand, lots and lots of offers at those price points over 2 million, and that just was unheard of even 12 months ago. So it is across all of the price points, and specifically here in Arlington up to that kind of 1.5. With that ratio edging higher, clearly what that means is that average prices are edging higher, no surprise there. What you see here in blue is the historic price data. Green is month by month. So it's historic. It's month by month. Don't worry about the fluctuations in pricing there, month by month. Look at the red line there, the average. As you can see, the average is kind of ticking higher. And we can reliably predict that the average sale price in Arlington this year will be at or over $1 million. You can see that it's been edging close to that. Very. Over the last few years, median, takes out the distribution to some extent, upwards probably there about 930, 940, I would say. Sizable increase in both of those metrics in the course of 2020. What's interesting to look at is what was the impact of COVID in terms of the number of what we're calling cumulative sales. So let's look at the number of sales. Let's look at it cumulative as the year kind of progressed. And that's what you see here. The blue is the 2019. You see it kind of rises, unsurprisingly, as homes go under agreement. The red color is 2020. This is the date the home goes under agreement. So it's not when it sells. So we've taken out that lag between under agreement and selling. So it's actually when the home goes under agreement, we're plotting here. But you can see to some extent here, this is COVID. COVID kicked in the housing market in that end of March, April, And then as we came into early May, so we begin to track up. And as you can see, we came back to parity, give or take, by about the August timeframe. You can see that a little clearer with this graph, which is the difference between the two. Go back a long way. This was a mild winter. More homes came on in 2020 than did in 2019. But here's the impact of COVID. There it is there. Less homes going under agreement. Increasing that was, here's the lockdown basically from this point to this point. That's lockdown.
And we did that ourselves. I mean, last year, our last homes that we bought on the market were the end of March, the last weekend in March. We had a home lined up ready to come on the market in Arlington the following weekend. And we said, you know, the buyers are slowing down. We really need to not come on the market yet. We need to wait and see what's going on. And it ended up that we didn't bring any homes on the market across our team for the whole of April.
Yeah, till that point
and
May,
then
basically.
May it started.
It
started again, and we started bringing homes on the market in May, and things have been improving ever since. Yeah,
we got parity in around about August. We saw less homes coming on the market in 2020 versus 19 in the fall market, but then we saw a little bit of a kind of splurge of homes at the end of the year. So all told, we saw about the same number, plus or minus 10 homes going under agreement in 2020 versus 2019, which is why we say that the Arlington market weathered 2020 very, very well. Supply constrained very much. Now let's take a look at 2021 versus 19. Doesn't make sense to compare to 2020 with that kind of dip during lockdown, which is where we are right now. If we treat 2019 as a normal year, where is 2021 in comparison to that normal year? As you can see here, we're tracking about parity. So similar to what we saw in 2019. This is why we say, given the amount of demand for Arlington, there just isn't enough supply of homes in Arlington to satisfy that demand.
And yet when you talk about it, when you talk about the average sale price to list price ratio that we're seeing in the first couple of months this year, this is why we're sort of saying hindsight's fantastic. Hindsight, if we all bought houses in 2009 when the prices were really depressed, that would have been good. We're saying this now. If you're thinking about selling in the next 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, come on now, because the market is incredible at the moment. This is the time to maximize on a sale price, because there's so much demand out there and there's just no supply.
What's happening, you might ask the question, so where are the buyers going? If they can't buy in Arlington, what's happening? Well, are they just waiting? Are they renting somewhere until their homes do come on the market? In many cases, we think this is not the case. The reason we're seeing a lot of demand on the market today is a change in lifestyle. As buyers begin to reevaluate, sure, the children are back at school. School is clearly very important, but I need a little bit more space. I'm going to be working from home 2 days a week. Perhaps both parents are going to be working from home. I need some more space. I remember what it was like being, within this confined space during lockdown. I want that little bit more space. Yeah. And so buyers will begin to think, do I buy in an Arlington? I don't really need the short commute to Boston. I would like it, but I don't need it anymore. Should I move a little bit further out? And so if you think about the price point of Arlington, now approaching $1 million, buyers can say, maybe I'll go to Acton. Maybe I'll go to Westford. They're moving that a little bit further out. So what am I going to say next? You know what I'm going to say next? I'm just following the Route 2 corridor at the end of the day. But they're going to begin to think about moving that just that little bit out. And if I was to show you the data for those towns, you would see also, it's on our website by the way, you would see that the number of, the demand is very much out there. So buyers who would traditionally would have been constrained to some extent with an Arlington, now they're not necessarily constrained. I just need a good school system. That's kind of a given. Yeah. But I can get a little bit more for my money if I go a little bit further out. So that's why, Danny says, now is a great time to bring a home on the market, because there is that demand and buyers have choice. And, whereas before they wouldn't necessarily have moved a little bit further out. increasingly they're beginning to think about that and saying, do I actually need to be this close to Boston? I would like to be, but I really do want to kind of think about it.
As you can sort of see from the average sale price to list price ratio for each month's, the last 13, 14 months, sure, Arlington's always been a positive appreciation, a positive sale price to list price ratio town. It's always around 101, 102, around there, because the average for the town for the whole year is 102. But in the last couple of months, the homes that have closed are at 110%. Now, that's an average across all of the homes, the single families that have sold. So you can be absolutely 100% certain that there are homes that are selling for 30%, 35% over the asking price. There are homes that are selling for 5% over the asking price. There are homes that are not selling for the asking price. The average is 110%. That's the sort of the key thing. The market is huge.
Right. Interesting to look, less so in Arlington. Other towns are much more interesting. We have this on our website too, is the difference between those two lines basically. And this is, where are we year on year in terms of the difference between 2021 versus 19. As you can see, we're up only about 10. So it looks very much as if we're going to have a similar number of home sales in 2021 that we have seen historically. No surprise if you look back to the sales graph that I showed you. It is kind of pretty static. It is very much supply constrained. There is just aren't enough homes selling in the town for a range of different reasons. It is a lower price point. The market, as I'll mention in a moment, is driven by downsizers. Where does somebody in Arlington downsize to, given that lower price point? So there are some systemic reasons why Arlington doesn't have an increase in number of sales moving forward. But ultimately, just as Danny mentioned, now is a great time to bring your home on the market. If you are thinking about it in the future, now would be a good time just because of that buyer demand. So, single family, let's look at condominiums. Excuse me. There's always a little bit of fluctuation. This is the number of home sales, condo sales, basically, for the last decade or so. Actually. As you can see, it fluctuates, but it doesn't really fluctuate very much. Some new construction development comes on, and so the number increases slightly. And as the number of new constructions decline, it kind of varies. So it doesn't really change very much in terms of the number. Similar, of course, to the single-family home market, although with a little bit more variability. Average prices, unsurprisingly, are up. As same where they are with the single-family home market. Prices are up both in terms of the average. Now we're looking at about 725. Likely that will probably be around 750 in terms of the condominium price. Just to put that in comparison, the average condominium price in towns around, I'll pick Lexington as an example, about the same price. So condominiums in Arlington have now come up in value to be very similar to homes around, to towns around, and that's driving demand for condominiums in Arlington. Median, very much the same, risen quite nicely. We haven't quite got some real data for condominium sale price to list price ratio, but even though prices are up, this is a little bit different from what we saw in 2020. Because if I look at the historic sale price to list price ratio, next month I'll have a little bit more around this to be much more granular in terms of what's happening month by month, as I just showed you with a single family. We did see a decline in 2019, caused primarily by that perception of an economic downturn. That depressed condo prices just a little bit, and we saw them depressed a little bit more in 2020. And you can see this as we look at it month by month, actually. This is the average sale price to list price ratio, 2020 month by month. And you can see it declining as the year progresses. Here we are here. Primarily because more condominiums came on, but also thinking back now, pre-vaccination days, condominiums have one feature, one issue with COVID, and that's the shared space. And so we saw that a little bit of reluctance on buyers to think about condominiums because of that shared space. Now, on the converse of that, of course, a condominium is at $750, single families at $1 million. So yes, I really don't want that as much shared space, but guess what? I can't afford a single family.
But,
so that's kind of counteracts that a little bit.
But with the change in what was happening with, working from home and all of this sort of stuff, the buyers of condos are typically folks, let's say Cambridge. They're renting in Cambridge. Time to buy a home. Their next step is typically a condominium in Arlington. That's fantastic. Well, with COVID, I don't really want a shared space anymore. I'm getting out of my rental because I'm scared of being not scared. I don't want to be in a shared space with other strangers. I don't really want to get into another shared space, even though I own the home. Let me look at further out. Now, with the commutes not necessary anymore, Acton, Groton, all of those, Harvard, homes out there where they can buy a single family home for $700K rather than spend $700K on a condominium closer in Arlington. That's where a lot of the choices have been made, which is why you see the reduction in the sale price to list price ratio as the year went on, because people were making those choices and they were moving into a single family further out rather than a condo closer in.
That's changing though, and I'll show you that in the cumulative data. That's kind of historical what happened in 2020. Yep. Here we are, the majority of people in Massachusetts fully vaccinated, back to normal slowly but surely. But let's look at cumulative sales, because it's interesting to see what the impact of COVID was. I just showed you what single family, there was an obvious impact of COVID. Not as much with the condominium market. We did see a reduction, but look where the reduction kicked in a little bit later. We saw less coming on in that May timeframe than we did in May 2019. Yeah. So, but as the year progresses, and this is where we saw that reduction in the ratio, the number of condominiums increased over what we saw in 2019. And this was predominantly the one of the reasons, I should say, why we saw that reduction in sale price to list price ratio. And you can see this as well as we look at the difference between those two graphs. As you can see, the dip below zero is where we saw less coming on in 2020 versus 19. It was delayed slightly than what we saw in the single family market. Got back to parity about mid-July, give or take, but then it kind of rose, and it rose markedly in that November-December timeframe. That's what gave rise excess supply essentially, and somewhat reluctant demand, reluctance of buyers to move in. Now, roll that one forward. Let's look at 2021 versus 19, assuming that 19 we can treat as a standard year or an average year. What you're seeing here is the number of condominium sales is dramatically higher than we saw in 2019. I mean, this is sales, so this is homes coming on the market and going under agreement. So much of that reluctance to move into condominiums looks to be diminishing as we move into 2021. So, the poor performance we saw of the market in late 2020 looks to have corrected itself as the state and as the country gets back to normal and condominiums become in vogue because of their lower price point in comparison to single family. As I say, $750, less than that, $725 today for an average price of a condominium versus $1 million for a single family. Big difference there, $250,000. And that's what's driving much of the condominium market today. So any seller thinking of bringing their condominium on the market, the same message applies. There are lots and lots of buyers around for those $750 or below condominiums, that kind of price range. So the reluctance or the issues we saw in late 20 have corrected themselves. And so the condo market is kind of off and running here in 2021, similar to what we're seeing in 2020. Or single with
as is the whole market.
Right, as is the whole market, actually, for that matter. So that's the condo market. A little look at the wider perspective, and this will explain in part why Arlington is such a popular town. What's going on on a big picture, at a macro level. First thing to look at is demographics. So demographic shifts are really driving much of the market in Arlington. This is data from the Census Bureau that shows how many people are in which age bracket. Two areas are important. The higher one,
Are the baby boomers?
Are the baby boomers, those children born after World War II. They are now getting into retirement and therefore to downsizing, thinking about downsizing. The lower bracket there is the millennials. They are the first-time home buyers. They're looking to jump out of the rentals, as Danny said, into their first home. If you think about Arlington, it's ideally situated for both of these two groups. Renters in Cambridge and Somerville and Boston, close in. I still want access to Boston. Arlington's a great destination, got a good school system for when I need it. Downsizers thinking the same thing. Winchester, Belmont, Lexington. Let's move into an Arlington close to my circle of friends. Lower price point. Still good access to Boston. Good school system. I don't care today, but I do for resale. And so Arlington finds itself at this kind of intersection, really, of these two demographic shifts. A large number of first-time home buyers and a large number of so-called downsizers, all looking to move into the town. And that's what's driven the market in Arlington. And that's why there are lots of buyers, but there simply is not enough supply in the town. Whatever comes on is selling very, very quickly. The other thing people talk about is interest rates. In this graph, blue is historic, green are predictions. And not our predictions, the financial pundits.
Who haven't been getting it very.
No, they're not very good.
In hindsight,
they are not very good at this.
Again.
But we'll go with we'll go with what they're saying. But they're not very good when you look at their predictions versus reality. It's not great. But what's important is that.
Say that.
No, it isn't
not very good.
No, it isn't very good. They did okay, but it's not very good. What's important is that it's increasing, but it's a long way from where we've seen historically, and a long way from where it will start to have a material impact on buyers' ability to repay. Yeah. So what's constraining the market to some extent is house price inflation. It's not that the interest rates are rising and therefore I can't afford to buy something. It's the fact that house prices are rising and I can't afford to buy the house that I want. That's the constraint in the market. And as house prices increase at that 10% list price to sell price ratio, that will begin to have a dampening effect on buyers' ability to buy in the town at the end of the day. So that's kind of what's constraining it, not necessarily interest rates. They're not a factor.
So predictions.
We never agree on this one, but we're going to do it. We're going to give it a go anyway.
We're going to try. Okay. We're going to try.
I like to divide it into buyers and sellers. To kind of look at those two groups instead of trying to kind of bring the two together. So there are an unprecedented number of buyers in the market today for the kind of rollout, if you will, the implications of COVID. And so there are lots and lots of buyers. Realistically, they cannot all buy in the towns that they want to buy in. There simply isn't the demand. The supply. There just isn't the supply.
But it's interesting too, because it's not necessarily, what Marcus was talking about before, about people changing, COVID is changing what's important to them. Where does our life look moving forward? The location that people live in. It's not just, I'll move out to Acton. It's also a move across the country, and people are making these choices. We sold a home earlier this year in Acton, and they were moving to San Diego. We sold a home, it's under agreement in Arlington. They're moving to San Diego.
What is it about San Diego?
So people are making choices about where they're going to live, which is why we're seeing such huge buyer demand, because everybody's changing their home, and I'd hate to be a buyer in this market.
It's tough,
and that's
our agents say it's very, very tough to represent a buyer in this market, to be successful ultimately.
Yeah,
that's what's very, very tough.
And what we're starting to see, and talking about predictions, and I know Marcus will keep going on buyers, but when we talk about sellers, we're going to see more sellers coming into the market, I believe, because sellers are now starting to see, the market is pretty good, but where do I buy? I can't buy. A lot of very smart sellers are making the decision that they're going to bring their home on the market now and they're going to rent, and at least rent for 12 months or 2 years until the market settles down a little bit, where there's not silly prices being paid for homes when you buy a home, because if you buy something now, you might have to pay silly prices, because that's what we're seeing when sellers are coming on the market, is silly prices being paid, which is why it's a great market to capitalize on coming on now if you can. Don't worry about buying, find somewhere to rent, because you're about to talk about from the buyer's perspective in 2021, it's tough.
It is difficult for a buyer. You mentioned San Diego. It's not just San Diego, of course. We've had sellers move to Maine, New Hampshire, down south. Looking at, I don't need where I am right now.
Yeah.
Let's move that a little bit. Western Mass. We had two sellers this year who moved to Western Mass.
Yeah.
So that choice. Now, so lots and lots of buyers in the market, an unprecedented number of buyers in the market, that's for sure. In terms of Arlington, constrained in terms of supply.
Yeah.
They really are constrained in terms of supply. Now, economics will tell it, and therefore house prices are rising. Economics would say, as house prices rise, so more sellers will enter the market, and so it will reach some kind of equilibrium. We've not historically seen that. No. The number of home sales in Arlington has been relatively static. I mean, it is, if you are thinking of selling in this market, now would be a great time. Yeah. If you have plans, I was going to move to my home in Maine in 2022 or 23.
2 years.
Maybe now's the right time to do it.
Yeah.
Just because the town is very much constrained in terms of the number of supply. Whatever comes on, sells. And it's roughly the same number of sales throughout the COVID period and so on. So we are seeing unprecedented number of buyers. That will continue. It will decline slightly as buyers, some buyers are clearly successful in this market, but it will not appreciably decline. And many buyers will make the choice, if I can't buy in an Arlington, I'll move somewhere else. I'll look in other towns. I'll broaden my search to a larger number of towns. In terms of the number of sellers, I would predict more sellers would come into the market, but historically that's not been the case. Economics 101 says yes, they will, but historically that's not been the case. And so I'm a little bit torn with the number of sellers. We should see more sellers coming into the market. We're clearly having lots of conversations with sellers about coming on the market. I'm just not 100% sure that, given what we've seen historically, we'll see a marked increase. Let me put it that way. 20-25% more sellers. I just don't see that, even though the market in Arlington can absolutely accommodate that number of sellers. And so inevitably, with lots of demand, limited supply, that will drive house prices higher. Average, inevitably will be $1 million a single family, $750 for condominiums. It'll kind of drive that higher.
And this is not, it's not, what we're seeing at the moment is not a bubble. This is not a bubble. All of the pundits talk about this. It's a change in lifestyle that the buyers and sellers are making in changing their housing choices. It's not going to go away. It may, we anticipate that this high buyer demand is going to continue until the end of 2021. I believe it'll go a little bit into 2022 as well, but it's not going to just flick a switch and it's off. It's just definitely not, because that demand is going to stay there, because the buyers, the choices that people are making in where and how they live is going to continue.
It's longer term, that's for sure. Yeah. And I think as you think about commercial real estate, not that we do much with commercial real estate, but if you've got an office building in Boston of 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 square feet, currently my employees are working from home. Maybe if we're going to go to a hybrid model, I only need 3,000 square feet. Yeah. Maybe I don't need to be in downtown Boston. Maybe I could afford to be a little bit further out, because that's where my employees were all along. And so that's got a long way to play out.
Yeah.
That
hasn't even started.
As companies don't take 1 year leases, they take 2, 3, 4, 5 year leases. Yeah. And that all has to unravel moving forward. So that's why I agree in that it is not a short-term thing. We're not all going back to the office to commute on 93 and 95
next week.
Next week, it's
going to be 100% people in the office.
It will go back to keep this hybrid environment, and organizations will see the cost benefits of doing that. And so buyers will change their priorities. And so this is a longer term shift that we're seeing. Seeing it a lot in 2021, but it will kind of play out in that longer term.
It'll settle down in not as much demand, but it's certainly not going to crash. It's just not going to crash.
There's nothing here, I think, that says
there's no crash in the future. This is a long-term, sustained change in lifestyle.
And the other reason it won't crash is that historically we haven't seen a large number of sellers able or willing to come into the market. If we saw a 50, 60, 70% increase even a 25% increase in the number of sellers in the market, that would begin to change things. But historically, we've just not seen that either. So that's kind of much more. But there is more buyer demand, that's for sure, continuing through 21 into 22. A static number of sellers in the market, just because, and I'm predicting that because we've historically that's where it's been. Other towns will be different. I mean, look at Lexington, for example. We are seeing, and we did see in 2020, a larger number of sellers coming into the market, able and willing to come into the market. So that's a different market there. But certainly in Arlington, similar number of sellers that we saw in 2019, 2020, and now moving forward into 2021. So the market being very much supply
So
constrained.
if you're thinking of selling, now's the time to do it. Now is when you're going to get the highest price. We own in Arlington. We're coming on the market. We're going to be coming on the market in June, because now's the time to sell. We're doing this personally. I mean, we're not just telling you this because we want to list your home. We're doing it ourselves because now is the time to maximize the sale price of the asset that you own.
So there you have it.
Why do we do these?
Why do we do this?
Why do we do these? We
My
do
new toy,
these.
I went backwards. My new toy.
We do these because we think that our clients deserve to be the smartest people at the closing table, and we all benefit by becoming smarter about home buying and selling. So because we're analytical, we're data driven, we just want to share
Right.
so that you know what's happening in the market. It's not just us knowing. We're trying to get this information out to people so that they know what's happening in the market. So that's why we do this.
So lots of information here. If you have any questions, we quite like talking about this.
Yeah, we do.
We like talking about this. So any questions, and not just about the Arlington market too. Our website, I've shown you the Arlington data here this evening, but our website is full of about 50 towns worth of information.
So if you're thinking about moving to another town,
if you're thinking about moving further out, we probably have the data for it. So there's lots of information on our website. Any questions, please reach out to us. We'd love to tell you what's going on in whichever town you're looking to move to.
So now it's time for us to go and get some dinner.
Right. So there we are. So from Danny and from myself, thank you and bye.
Bye.